While understanding the concept of research, we have seen that research is a systematic process. If it is a systematic process, it consists of number of steps, and the major four steps in the process of research include selecting and defining research problem, describing the methodology of research, collecting data, and the last step in undertaking research is analyzing and interpreting data. Now let's see what activities a researcher undertakes when he or she has to select and define the problem. Selecting and defining the problem, the very first activity is identify and state the problem. The researcher starts with a very broad area where he would like to undertake research and then narrows down that broad area into a specific problem by identifying the variables and defining those variables and stating the objectives of the studies. So, identification and statement of the problem leads to identification of variable and stating the objectives, and then the researcher looks at the studies which have been already undertaken, tries to formulate the hypothesis for the study. And hypothesis is nothing but a tentative solution to the problem, or is referred to as an educated guess. The researcher is also required to determine the researchability of the problem selected, whether the researcher can actually conduct the study, can the researcher collect the data, do the researcher have all the resources which are required to undertake the study in the field, do the researcher have the capability to undertake research. These questions are answered by the researcher, and the worthwhileness of the research problem is also assessed by the researcher, that research undertaken will be either contributing to the existing body of knowledge or is going to help the researcher to find solution to one or more than one problem which is being faced in the field. The next step in research is describing the methodology of research, and the activities which are undertaken by the researcher include selecting the method of research. Now, based upon the objectives and hypotheses formulated for the study, the researcher tries to determine whether descriptive research is going to be undertaken, if it deals with current processes, practices, or whether the correlational research is going to be used, or an experimental research is going to be utilized to test the hypothesis or achieve the objectives of the study. The next step is to decide how one would go about selecting a sample, because conducting a research on the population is very expensive, time-consuming proposition. Thus, sample needs to be decided. And if your population is homogeneous, you are going to select a random sample. And if your population is heterogeneous, maybe you are going for utilizing the stratified random sampling technique. If your sample is based upon some purpose, then maybe you prefer to use the purposive sampling. So both probability and non-probability sampling techniques are available with the researcher. So depending upon what the population is, the researcher has to decide about a sampling technique which will be utilized to select the sample. Then the researcher tries to determine, are there tools which are available, or the researcher needs to develop the tools for collecting data for the variables of the study. So this involves the selection or the development of the required tools, which may consist of the standardized test, the questionnaires, the interview schedules, or observation schedule. Researcher is also required to describe the procedure for data collection. Now, this is especially true when you are going to use different tools and different methods of research. If a researcher is likely to carry out experimental research where the researcher is interested in determining the effect of computer assisted instruction on achievement in physics of first year students, then this would require that the researcher tries to prepare the module, which is computer assisted instruction module, and then he tries to teach the students of first year for 1 month, and pre-test post-test design is used. So data collection procedure need to be clearly described by the researcher so that it facilitates taking up the studies in future. And while interpreting the result, one needs to keep in mind the procedure which has been adopted to collect the data. The next step is to decide about the statistical techniques will be utilized for analyzing the data. Now here it will depend upon what kind of objectives you have formulated for the study or hypothesis you have formulated for the study. So based upon the objectives and hypothesis, descriptive statistics or inferential statistics can be utilized by the researcher. The third step in research is collecting data. Now the researcher has already prepared a plan and described the methodology of undertaking research. So that plan is implemented, sample is selected, and data is collected from the sample by utilizing the tools which have been developed by the researcher or selected by the researcher. Utmost care is taken by the researcher to collect data which is objective, fair, and which is representative of the population. The next step in research is to analyze the data and interpret the data. The statistical techniques which have been selected by the researcher, they are applied on the collected data and the results are interpreted taking care of the conditions, the limitations of the data. And thus the process of research is complete with interpretation of data, and the researcher is now ready to prepare a research report. So in a nutshell, we can say the process of research passes through 4 stages, including selecting and defining a research problem, describing methodology of research, collecting data, and analyzing and interpreting the data.